On January 8, 2016, David Bowie gave the world one last surprise. He released an album called Blackstar. The songs were dark and strange. The video showed a man who looked sick but still full of creative fire. Fans had no idea this was his goodbye letter. 2 days later, he was gone. For 50 years, David Bowie had been the master of change. When other musicians found success and stuck with it, Bowie threw it all away and became someone completely new. Folk singer to glam rock alien, soul crooner to electronic pioneer, movie star to internet visionary. He never stayed the same person for long. This habit of changing confused record companies. It frustrated radio stations. Sometimes it even annoyed his fans. But it also made him one of the most important artists who ever lived. He showed the world that you don't have to be just one thing. You can reinvent yourself as many times as you want. Bowie's real name was David Jones. He grew up in a small house in London after World War II. His family didn't have much money. His father struggled with mental illness. His older half-brother had severe problems too, and eventually killed himself. Young David lived with the fear that he might end up the same way. The path wasn't easy. He spent years being rejected by record labels. He lived in tiny apartments and worked odd jobs to pay rent. He played in band after band that went nowhere. Many times he thought about quitting. The music business seemed designed to crush dreamers like him. Then something clicked. He created a character named Ziggy Stardust, a bisexual alien rock star with red hair and lightning bolt makeup. Suddenly, the world was paying attention. Bowie had found his secret weapon, the power to become anyone he wanted to be. Success brought new problems. Fame made him paranoid. Drugs nearly destroyed him. His marriage fell apart. The pressure to keep changing, to keep shocking people, took a terrible toll on his mind and body. There were times when David Bowie, the person, got lost inside all the characters he created. But he survived. He got clean. He found love with supermodel Iman. He became a father. He learned to balance his need for artistic freedom with his need for a normal life. Just when people thought they had him figured out, he would surprise them again. In his final decade, Bowie largely disappeared from public view. He stopped touring. He rarely gave interviews. Fans wondered if he was done making music. They had no idea he was secretly fighting cancer while working on what would become his masterpiece Farewell. Blackstar wasn't just an album. It was David Bowie's final magic trick. He turned his own death into art. He left the world wondering, questioning, and celebrating all at once. Even in dying, he refused to be ordinary. This is the story of a working-class kid who became a space alien, a soul man, a goblin king, and a dozen other characters along the way. It's about someone who chose to live multiple lives instead of just one. Someone who showed us that being different isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate. David Robert Jones was born on January 8, 1947, in South London. The world was still picking up the pieces after World War II. Food was rationed, buildings had bomb damage, families like the Joneses lived in small houses and counted every penny. The fear got worse when David learned about his half-brother Terry. Terry was 10 years older and already showing signs of serious mental illness. He heard voices. He saw things that weren't there. Terry would pace around the house, talking to invisible people. Sometimes he would grab David and tell him wild stories about government conspiracies and secret messages and songs on the radio. When David was 13, something happened that changed his life forever. He was at school, arguing with his friend George Underwood over a girl. George got angry and punched David in the left eye. The injury was bad, really bad. David's pupil was permanently damaged. From that day forward, his left eye looked different from his right eye. One pupil stayed large while the other worked normally. Most kids would have been devastated. David was fascinated. He liked looking different. He liked that people stared at him. The injury became part of his identity, something that made him special instead of ordinary. Music became his escape. His father bought him a cheap plastic saxophone when he was 12. David practiced for hours in his tiny bedroom. He learned songs by ear and made up his own melodies. When rock and roll arrived from America, David was hooked. He saw Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry on TV and knew he wanted to be up there too. At 15, David formed his first band with some school friends. They called themselves the Conrads. They played at local youth clubs and school dances. David played saxophone and sang backup vocals. They weren't very good, but they had fun. For a few hours each week, David could forget about his father's illness and his brother's strange behavior. The next few years were brutal. David joined band after band, the King Bees, the Manish Boys, the Lower Third. None of them lasted long. Record companies would listen to their demos and shake their heads. Radio stations wouldn't play their songs. Club owners paid them almost nothing. David slept on couches and floors. He ate cheap food and wore the same clothes for days. He worked odd jobs to survive, selling records, teaching dance classes, even working as a butcher's assistant. His hands were always stained with blood after work. He hated every minute of it, but he needed the money. The worst part was watching other musicians succeed while he struggled. The Beatles became global superstars. The Rolling Stones sold millions of records. Bob Dylan changed popular music forever. David was stuck playing to empty rooms and getting rejected by everyone in the music business. In 1965, David made a decision that would define his career. He was tired of people confusing him with Davy Jones from the Monkees, so he changed his last name to Bowie, after the famous knife. David Bowie sounded stronger, more mysterious. It was his first real reinvention, but it wouldn't be his last. Even with the new name, success didn't come. His first solo album in 1967 sold almost no copies. Music critics either ignored it or wrote harsh reviews. David was 20 years old and felt like a complete failure. He watched friends from school get steady jobs and start families while he chased an impossible dream. The worst moment came in 1968. David's half-brother Terry had a complete mental breakdown. He was hospitalized and diagnosed with schizophrenia. David visited him in the psychiatric ward and saw his own worst fears come to life. Terry barely recognized him. He mumbled about voices in his head and secret messages in the wallpaper. In 1969, the whole world was watching television. NASA was about to put the first man on the moon. David Bowie was watching too, but he was thinking about something different. While everyone else saw scientific achievement, David saw a story about loneliness and isolation. He saw Major Tom, an astronaut lost in space. Space Oddity was unlike anything on the radio. The song started quiet and strange, with David singing in a voice that sounded both childlike and otherworldly. Then it built into something bigger, with orchestral arrangements and sound effects that made listeners feel like they were floating in space. The BBC played it during their moon landing coverage, and suddenly everyone in Britain knew David Bowie's name. David spent the next 2 years experimenting. He grew his hair long and wore dresses on stage. He played acoustic guitar and wrote songs about mysticism and fairy tales. He formed a band called The Hype and performed in colorful costumes that looked like superhero outfits. Nothing quite clicked with audiences, but David was learning valuable lessons about performance and image. The real breakthrough came when David met Angela Barnett at a party in 1969. Angie was American, blonde, and completely fearless. She had studied music and theater and understood David's artistic vision better than anyone. She also had wild ideas about fashion, sexuality, and breaking social rules. Angie became David's girlfriend, creative partner, and eventually his wife. Angie pushed David to be bolder. She encouraged him to wear makeup, experiment with androgyny, and shock audiences with his appearance. Together, they developed a look that was part rock star, part fashion model, part alien visitor. David started dyeing his hair bright colors and wearing tight, glittery outfits that confused and excited people. The breakthrough moment came in 1972 with the creation of Ziggy Stardust. David didn't just write songs about this character, he became him completely. Ziggy was a bisexual alien rock star from Mars who came to Earth to save humanity through music. He had bright red hair, lightning bolt makeup across his face, and a jumpsuit covered in sequins. The first Ziggy Stardust performance was at the Toby Jug pub in London. When David walked on stage as Ziggy, the small audience didn't know what they were seeing. This wasn't just a musician, this was a complete transformation. David moved like a dancer, posed like a model, and sang like someone from another planet. The performance lasted less than an hour, but it changed everything. Word spread quickly through London's music scene. David started getting bookings at bigger venues. Music journalists wrote about this strange new performer who might be the future of rock and roll. Young people, especially those who felt like outsiders themselves, were drawn to Ziggy's message of acceptance and difference. The album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars was released in June 1972. Songs like Starman and Suffragette City became instant classics. But the real magic happened during live performances. David had created something that had never existed before. a rock concert that was also theater, fashion show, and religious experience all at once. Television appearances cemented Ziggy's impact. When David performed Starman on BBC's Top of the Pops in July 1972, he put his arm around guitarist Mick Ronson's shoulder and gave him a flirtatious look. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it shocked parents across Britain. Here was a rock star openly playing with gender and sexuality on primetime television. Fan mail poured in from teenagers who felt like freaks and outcasts. Gay kids saw someone who wasn't ashamed of being different. Girls saw a man who wore makeup and wasn't afraid to be beautiful. Boys saw someone who could be strong and feminine at the same time. Ziggy Stardust gave permission to an entire generation to be whoever they wanted to be. By 1973, Ziggy Stardust wasn't just a character, he was a cultural phenomenon. David Bowie had created something that went far beyond music. He had given birth to a new way of being famous, where the artist's image was just as important as their songs. Maybe more important, the Ziggy Stardust tour became a traveling circus of glitter, makeup, and sexual ambiguity. Fans came dressed as their own versions of Ziggy. They dyed their hair orange and red. They wore platform boots and eye makeup. Concert halls looked like gatherings of beautiful aliens from another planet. David had created not just a fan base, but a movement. The success opened doors to America. David's first major U.S. tour in 1972 was a revelation. American audiences had never seen anything like Ziggy Stardust. The concerts were part rock show, part Broadway musical, part fashion spectacle. Critics didn't know how to describe what they were witnessing. Some called it the future of entertainment. Others said it was the end of civilization. David thrived on the controversy. Every shocked parent, every confused music critic, every religious leader who condemned his performances just made him more famous. He understood something that most entertainers missed: being ignored was worse than being hated. At least hatred meant people were paying attention. The peak of David's early fame came in 1973 at his final Ziggy Stardust concert at London's Hammersmith Odeon. Without warning the audience, David announced that this would be Ziggy's last performance ever. Fans screamed and cried. They couldn't believe their hero was killing off the character that had given them so much joy and identity. But David was already moving on. He had absorbed everything he could from the glam rock explosion and was ready to explore new territory. His next album, Aladdin Sane, showed a more sophisticated songwriter tackling themes of fame, madness, and American culture. The lightning bolt across his face became one of the most recognizable images in popular culture. Fame brought opportunities beyond music. David started acting, appearing in films and television shows. His otherworldly appearance made him perfect for science fiction roles. Directors saw that he could embody characters that seemed truly alien, not just human actors pretending to be from another planet. The mid-1970s saw David's artistic peak with a trilogy of albums recorded in Berlin: Low, Heroes, and Lodger. Working with producer Brian Eno, David created music that was both experimental and emotionally powerful. These albums influenced countless musicians and showed that pop music could be both accessible and deeply artistic. Heroes became David's most beloved song. Written about two lovers meeting secretly by the Berlin Wall, it captured both the pain of separation and the power of love to overcome any barrier. When David performed it live, entire audiences would sing along to the chorus. The song made people feel like they could overcome anything, even if just for one day. Live Aid in 1985 marked another peak in David's career. His performance at Wembley Stadium reminded the world why he was considered one of the greatest live performers ever. Songs like Heroes and Let's Dance had the massive crowd singing and dancing together. David proved he could move people not just individually, but collectively. This documentary explores the legendary life of David Bowie, one of music's most enigmatic and transformative figures, though viewers should understand that much of what follows is based on rumors, speculation, and unverified accounts that have circulated in the music industry for decades. The script begins with Bowie's mysterious final album, Blackstar, released just days before his death in January 2016, setting the stage for a story that spans over 50 years of constant reinvention and artistic evolution. According to various unconfirmed sources and industry gossip, Bowie's journey allegedly started as David Jones, a working-class London boy born in 1947, who supposedly struggled with family abandonment issues and fears about inherited mental illness from his father and half-brother. The narrative suggests he endured years of rejection from record labels in the 1960s, living in poverty while cycling through failed bands, though these details come largely from rumored accounts and may not reflect documented reality. The breakthrough supposedly came with Space Oddity in 1969 and the creation of his Ziggy Stardust persona in 1972, which allegedly launched him to superstardom, though the specific circumstances are often disputed or embellished in various tellings. The script outlines his rumored rise to global fame through glam rock, his supposed influence on fashion and gender expression, and his acclaimed Berlin trilogy of albums, though many details about this period remain unverified or exist only in conflicting accounts from various sources. The documentation continues with alleged struggles, including severe cocaine addiction during his Los Angeles years in the 1970s, rumored paranoid delusions about dark magic, marital problems with first wife Angie, and various industry conflicts, though these accounts often rely on secondhand reports and speculation rather than confirmed facts. The story supposedly shows his reinvention in the 1980s with mainstream success, his marriage to supermodel Iman, and his embrace of early internet technology, followed by a period of relative public silence after a reported heart attack in 2004. The narrative concludes with his alleged secret battle with liver cancer for 18 months while recording his final album, his death 2 days after his 69th birthday, and the subsequent global mourning from fans and fellow musicians, though specific medical details and personal family reactions are largely based on media speculation rather than official statements. Throughout the documentary, the script emphasizes Bowie's supposed legacy as an artist who constantly challenged conventions, influenced countless musicians from Madonna to Lady Gaga, broke gender barriers, and became an icon for LGBTQ+ communities worldwide, while acknowledging that many of these claims about his influence and personal life come from industry rumors, fan speculation, and media reports rather than verified biographical sources. The overarching theme suggests that Bowie's life story represents the triumph of artistic courage and personal reinvention over conformity and fear, inspiring people to embrace change and difference. Though viewers should remember that this narrative is constructed largely from unconfirmed accounts, entertainment industry gossip, and speculative interpretations of his public persona rather than documented biographical facts, making this more of an exploration of the Bowie mythology than a definitive historical record.